Well, it's a hard one. Yeah, I think it's maybe something we have to think about a little bit as an industry, because free agency's there for players who've been in the competition, the 8 years, and they've earned the right to choose their clubs. I think players who've been in the competition for 2 years, it's a bit rich to say, oh, this is where I want to go. That's the way the system works at the moment and allows them to do that. I think it would be a good thing if the industry had a bit of a think about, well, is there a mechanism whereby you can get better value for young kids who leave a club after their second year? But it's something that clubs in the non-traditional markets maybe face a little bit more. It's interesting. You look at West Coast for argument's sake, and I think about something like 85% of their list, maybe even higher, are all Western Australians. We can't. It's almost impossible for us to get to that point in terms of Queenslanders, simply because you don't have the quality of player up here. So in terms of the question of how do you stop them choosing their club, the first one is you do your best to try and keep them. But second, I think maybe the industry does need to have a little bit of a look at that and say, all right, well, we've given players free agency. If players do want to move after 2 years, is there a mechanism by which we can ensure there's better value for that occurring? Because it is a decent investment that you place in young players when you're relocating them, and we pretty much have no option but to relocate players. Yeah, well, when you meet with clubs either before or during the trade period, you always give an indication as to which players are likely to come off the list, which players you're prepared to trade or delist. We were happy to try and help Aaron get to another AFL club, but there wasn't the level of interest required for that to happen. I suppose now he will be a delisted free agent, so he won't cost the club anything if they want to put him on their list, and we'll watch and see whether that happens or not. Yeah, in relation to Jesse, we did speak to other clubs and say that if someone was interested, we'd be willing to trade him. We're also he was probably what you classify as trade or keep, subject to how our final position was at the end of the trading period. As I mentioned, we would have liked to have traded our way up the order, and we explored the options there pretty much for the entire last week. But when someone's the only real bite we had on that front was when someone was prepared to trade for, say, a teens pick, 15, 16, but it was going to cost you 3 second-round picks. So when you look at that and you do the equation, you say, okay, well, that's Polak, Longer, Doherty. Pick 16 is going to have to be an outstanding player to justify that, and we decided that, knowing how the draft is likely to fall and looking at the quality of players in the 20s, that we didn't want to lose three picks for one. So that's probably where it hurt Jesse a little bit, in that we've walked away from the trading period with 6 picks inside 34, which gives us the option to be fairly strategic through the second round. Getting back to that competition element, we'd spoken to some other clubs, and North Melbourne was one of those clubs, and said, well, looking at your list, I think Patrick could offer you something. North Melbourne obviously knew Patrick, and like all clubs, they scout opposition lists and the like. So when they realised that maybe that could be done for a pick in the 40s, they started to express interest. That again sharpened up Collingwood's mind. We had asked about an on-baller at Collingwood. They didn't want to do that trade, but we also had, as I said, some interest in if there's a need that we could address through the trade period, that we'd explore that type of option, and that's where Jackson Payne came into it. And speaking to his agent said, well, he was obviously behind Cloak at Collingwood. They'd just brought in Jesse White for pick 44 or something like that. So he was probably looking at it thinking, well, the opportunities are going to be a bit limited. And then when you look at our list, you say, well, that's clearly an area where we need to build a bit of depth. He'd had 70 shots on, or 68 shots on goal in the VFL over the course of the year. He was a player that we had watched during his draft year, so we knew a bit about him, and we thought there'd been some improvement from that period. So he was the one player on the Collingwood list who we thought, in terms of, getting a reasonable outcome for Brisbane and meeting one of our needs, that we'd inquire. And after some discussion, Collingwood indicated they're prepared to do the trade. But I also do think the fact that North Melbourne entered the race probably helped on that front. Yeah, Trent West, well, we knew we were going to have to bring a ruckman in once Billy confirmed that he didn't want to remain in Brisbane. We'd obviously been thinking about ruckman in the lead up to the trade period. Trent West is a player, watched him play a lot over the course of the last few years, predominantly at senior level. Also saw him play in the VFL Grand Final, and he had a very good game there. He's ready to go. He's a footballer who's ready to go. Making inquiries of Brad Ottens, who'd worked with him and played with him. He was fairly positive about him, particularly in that second ruck role. And I think if you do go back through Trent's history when he was playing in the Geelong Premiership team, that was his role as second ruck, and someone who's happy to play that role. Matt Leuenberg is obviously our first ruck, and he's a terrific ruckman across the competition. So having someone who's happy to play that role, got experience, been a premiership player, then he certainly ticked a lot of boxes. Had spoken to Trent's agent ahead of the trade period and during the trade period, just to flag our interest and keep the conversation going there. And then once a few other things sorted their way out, for argument's sake, we might have been doing, as part of the Port Adelaide deal, you're talking to GWS. Now that might involve a player from there. That didn't come to fruition. So in the end, we said, well, Trent West he fits a need. He ticks a lot of boxes. Let's get active in terms of making an offer and talking to he and his agent. And towards the end, we knew how it was going to play out, and just activated presented the offer for Trent, and went from there. Well, the final outcome, look, I would have liked us to have got another first round pick out of it all, and the reality is we spent almost 3 weeks trying to get that outcome through dealing with Port Adelaide and investigating sliding picks and the like. We weren't able to achieve that. There was a couple of things that worked against us there, which I've spoken about. So that was probably the disappointing part of it, not being able to get another pick inside that first round. Pleased that we managed to get picks up the order a fair bit from where offers were originally tabled. Obviously disappointed to lose the players that we've lost. I think there's some terrific young talent that we're going to miss there. But from a long-term point of view, the fact that we've got the 6 picks inside 34, I think if things work for us on draft night in that second round, it gives us a real opportunity to reshape our list and be reasonably strategic about the way where we select players and where they fit in with us over the longer term. So we'll be taking a view to the draft of looking at these players, for 3 and 4 years down the track, not necessarily for next year. When you're going to bring in a number of young players, I think you've got to be realistic that there's going to be a decent development journey there, and so we're hopeful that it really does rebalance our list and set us up for the point where your Merritts and Pat Fools move on, and Jed and our older group, when they're moving out, we've got players who are very much ready to come in and take their positions.